Right now, as you are reading these lines, there is a needle standing still at a position where it should not be allowed to stand. That needle sits on a machine the size of a small car that is traveling through a part of the universe that no human has ever seen before. No probe has ever been there before, and no scientific model has ever accurately predicted what exists there. For nearly half a century, that needle has measured the magnetic field of the universe in a steady and boring way until the year 2020, when it suddenly jumped up. And then it never came back down. This is not a new spacecraft. It was built before the internet existed, before home computers existed, before most of the scientists studying its data were even born. And this tiny ancient machine is now sending back to us something that is shaking the foundations of modern physics. The researchers studying its data are not using words like interesting or surprising. They are using words like astonishing, baffling, and we were wrong. The scientist at NASA even uttered a thought that he himself hesitated to say out loud. Perhaps the spacecraft has drifted into an ancient plasma cloud that still carries the magnetic field of another star. This is the story of Voyager, and this is the part that the headlines do not tell you. First, no one has solved this mystery. Second, the only machine that can answer is running out of life right now, and no one is talking about it. And third, a day has been locked into the calendar right in this year that will mark the moment that no human civilization has ever reached before. Stay with me, because by the time this story ends, you will never look at the night sky in the same way again. I am Jack, and this is Space Uncovered. Subscribe right now if you want to hear many more stories like this, because we have only just begun. Let us go back to the beginning, because to understand why a needle standing still can shake all of physics, we must go back to a morning on the 5th of September 1977, when a rocket left the launch pad carrying this machine into space. Its mission at that time was so modest it was almost ordinary. Fly past Jupiter, fly past Saturn, take a few pictures, record a few measurements, then drift quietly away. People expected it to live for about 5 years. No one in the control room that day dared to think that nearly half a century later this machine would still be whispering home. It did not carry solar panels because where it was headed the light from the sun was too weak to rely on. Instead, it was powered by 3 small machines that convert heat from the slow decay of a plutonium block into electricity, a source of life that could follow it far into the darkness. And among the roughly 10 scientific instruments it carried there were 2 senses that would later become priceless to our entire story. The first sense is a magnetometer, an instrument sensitive enough to detect even the faintest magnetic fields of the universe, which is exactly what recorded the needle's jump. The second sense is a device that can listen to the vibrations of plasma, of the very charged matter floating thinly in space. Remember these 2 senses well, one to feel magnetic fields and one to listen to matter because everything that is coming revolves around them. The machine glided past Jupiter, then Saturn, using the gravity of each planet like a slingshot to speed up, and so it hurtled farther than anything humans had ever sent. While other missions ended one by one and fell into silence, it kept going each year farther, each year deeper into regions no one had touched. And then on the 25th of August, 2012, 35 years after leaving the launch pad, it did something no human object had ever done. It crossed a series of boundary layers enclosing our solar system, first the termination shock, where the solar wind suddenly slows down, then the chaotic hot region called the heliosheath, and finally the heliopause, the outermost boundary of a giant bubble stretching about 11 billion miles, inflated by the wind from our star. Inside that bubble is everything we have ever called home. Outside, it is true space between the stars, and our tiny machine stepped through, then kept transmitting signals from the other side, turning it into the only witness humanity has ever had deep in interstellar darkness. Before it crossed the boundary, scientists had built detailed models describing what that place should look like. Quiet, smooth, a cold and sparse region where almost nothing happens. The machine stepped into what was supposed to be that quiet. And it began sending back numbers saying that quiet had never existed. And right at the moment it stepped through the numbers, told a completely different story. Voyager recorded the amount of charged particles blown out from the sun suddenly dropping by about 1,000 times, while the amount of cosmic rays coming from the rest of the galaxy increased by about 9%. That was a clear sign that it had truly left the territory of the sun. But this is what made the scientists sit up straight. For many decades, people thought the solar wind would fade away gently as it went farther from our star, thinning out and dimming until it quietly merged into interstellar space. That is what every model predicted. But Voyager's data showed the opposite. The solar wind did not fade at all. It slammed straight into a sharp boundary, an invisible wall, where it was forced to stop and change direction, creating a real physical border between 2 worlds. The models were wrong. And that was only the first thing in a series of things this place would teach us about how wrong we had been. Because after crossing the boundary, Voyager's magnetometer still occasionally recorded sudden jumps in the magnetic field strength around it. And those jumps the scientists understood. They came from the sun itself. When our star spewed out powerful bursts, those waves traveled all the way to the boundary and slammed into it, compressing the interstellar matter and strengthening the magnetic field for a moment. People imagined their origin like a giant piston. The sun pushes and the space on the other side rings in response. The most important thing about these jumps is that they always passed. After a few months, the numbers settled down again like an echo fading in a cave. That is why the event that began in the year 2020 left everyone so confused, because at first it looked exactly like all the previous times. The magnetic field strength spiked just like another echo from the sun's piston, but this time the echo did not fade. The numbers did not settle down after a few months as usual. They stayed. And instead of fading, they kept rising stubbornly, persistently, month after month. Each month that passed without the numbers returning a spine-chilling question grew in the minds of those analyzing the data. If this was not a fading echo, then maybe it did not come from the sun at all. Maybe Voyager had entered something real, a real region, not just gliding through a ripple. And that was not as easy to rule out as you might think, because Voyager had taught us that the boundary out there is not standing still. It moves. Its surface is distorted by giant waves that can rise as high as 10 astronomical units, that is about 930 million miles, 10 times the distance from Earth to the Sun. And those changes happen so fast, they contradict every model, and to this day, no one has explained them. So think about what that means for you. The boundary that Voyager crossed is not just a line drawn on a chart, it is a shield. It deflects the most dangerous forms of cosmic radiation, the high-energy particles coming from stars that exploded far away, keeping them from crashing into the inner solar system with their full power. For billions of years, that shield has protected every form of life that has ever existed on this planet. And what Voyager is telling us is that the environment pressing on that shield from the outside is more complex, more shifting, and contains more unmapped things than any model ever dared to draw. If there really are strange plasma clouds floating out there carrying magnetic fields we have never known, then our understanding of the stability of the very shield protecting us suddenly becomes far more fragile than we thought. Let us pause for a moment with the very numbers themselves, because their precision is what makes this mystery so hard to deny. The jump began around the middle of the year 2020, packed into a short 8 days. In those 8 days, both the magnetic field strength and the density of matter around the spacecraft increased by about 1.35 times, compared to before two numbers that moved almost in lockstep, a sign of something compressing both the magnetic field and the matter at the same time. But instead of stopping there, the magnetic field strength kept climbing, reaching about 0.56 units by the beginning of the year 2021, a value stronger than anything ever measured in this region. Then it fluctuated, dropped slightly, edged up again, and the astonishing thing is that, for at least 2.5 years after that, the magnetic field stayed stubbornly high. Scientists began calling this prolonged phenomenon by its own name, a bump in the magnetic field data, a rise that refused to go away. Imagine that strange persistence. 2.5 years long enough for a child to be born and learn to toddle, and the needle still would not come down, as if the spacecraft was passing through something so vast it would take years to cross it all. If it was a cloud, then it was not a thin mist passing by, but an invisible continent stretching through the darkness, and the spacecraft was only just entering its edge. But right when this mystery was at its most baffling peak, fate nearly took away our ability to study it. Because on the 14th of November 2023, the spacecraft suddenly went mute. It was still sending signals home, but what it sent was only a meaningless stream of binary ones and zeros, repeating that the engineers, after decades of reading everything the spacecraft had ever said, could not decode. The instrument was still alive. The signal was still coming. But what it was trying to say had become meaningless. The cause, when they finally tracked it down, was both tiny and cruel. A glitch in the flight data system's memory, the part responsible for sorting and packaging the scientific data before sending it home, had failed after nearly half a century of exposure to interstellar radiation. And this was not the first time the spacecraft had acted up. Before it had quietly switched to an old, failed navigation computer, causing the data sent home to be distorted for many months. This is an aging spacecraft accumulating years each year, adding a new crack to its nearly 50-year-old body. In any normal technical situation, you fix a broken component by going to it and replacing it, but here that is impossible. The only tool left is radio signals, and even those take 22.5 hours just to travel one way. Imagine that work from inside the control room. You look at a piece of bad data, you build a hypothesis about where it is wrong, you write a command to try, you send it, then wait 22.5 hours for the command to arrive, and another 22.5 hours for the answer to come back. Every smallest troubleshooting step consumes nearly 2 full days. And throughout that time, everyone carried the chilling truth that just one wrong command sent once across that vast emptiness could end the entire mission forever with no way to save it. For many months, the engineers gently probed, testing one hypothesis after another, finding ways to fix it without causing more damage. And then the final solution came. They realized the broken code could not be fixed, but it could be moved. Starting from the 18th of April, 2020, 4 of the affected software sections were broken into small pieces and tucked into other empty spaces in the spacecraft's remaining memory. Each piece tested separately, then reassembled, so the whole system ran as one, and only by June of that year was the problem fully resolved. But remember what that team was racing to save. It was not just an old machine. It was humanity's only witness to one of the strangest mysteries ever opened before us, and it had nearly gone mute forever, right at the moment the story was becoming the most compelling, exactly when we needed it to speak the most. By the middle of the year 2024, after many months of working under a pressure that most technical situations never create, the spacecraft woke up and began sending back clean, clear data again. And the first thing it confirmed was that the bump was still there, the jump had still not returned to the baseline. But instead of stopping at that mystery, the returning data opened up a story that was far more subtle. For many years, the spacecraft's plasma listening instrument had been catching something that no model predicted, a faint but persistent hum in the very structure of the matter between the stars, a sound that existed year after year without stopping. According to the researchers, this was the first time in human history there had been a continuous stream of measurements of interstellar plasma density, instead of just disconnected snapshots each time a shock from the sun happened to pass by. Imagine that difference. Before, it was as if we only had a thermometer glanced at once a year at exactly one single point, and now suddenly there was a continuous stream of data flowing in enough to draw a weather map of an entire continent. And what that stream of data revealed was that the space between the stars was not at all a quiet, uniform, and empty background. It had texture. It had regions of dense and sparse areas, currents patches of its own weather woven from charged matter stretching across enormous distances. But the detail that really stunned the scientists came later, when they analyzed how the magnetic field oscillated over time. Because after the bump reached its peak and began to stabilize around the year 2022, the chaotic fluctuations seen before that almost disappeared. The magnetic field became strangely calm, its distribution smooth and balanced to a suspicious degree, completely unlike the violent turbulence that was the hallmark of the solar wind and of the region inside the bubble. It was as if the spacecraft had just gone from a rough sea full of crashing waves and swirling currents to a surface of water so flat it made one suspicious. And that flatness was not emptiness. It was a new kind of order, a structured silence that no one expected to find at this far edge. For some scientists, that unexpected calm suggested a possibility that was almost provocative. Perhaps the spacecraft had finally left the region still stirred by the sun and stepped into something truly more pristine, a corner of interstellar space that our star had never touched, or a completely new state of balance that no human instrument had ever measured. This was only one possibility, a thought whispered carefully, not yet a conclusion, and we will come back to it. But whatever the final explanation is, these three pieces, when placed side by side, all point to the same thing: the magnetic field bump that refused to fade, the persistent plasma hum revealing a textured environment, and the strange silence that followed right after. All three together say that where the spacecraft is drifting through is not where we thought, and it is not a fleeting disturbance that can be waved off. It is large enough, persistent enough, consistent enough to force us to see it as a real region, a new chapter of the universe that Voyager has quietly turned to without any warning. And this is where tragedy slips into the science, because right at the moment when this mystery needs the most data to be solved, the very source creating the data is fading away. The spacecraft draws its power from 3 small heat-converting machines from a plutonium block decaying into electricity, and the plutonium block itself loses only half its power every 87.7 years. But that is not the problem. The problem is that the actual electricity the spacecraft can use is running out much faster, losing about 4 watts every year, and by now it is producing only about 57% of the power compared to the day it left the launch pad. This is a death foretold by arithmetic, with no negotiation. Many years ago, the scientists and engineers sat down together and drew up a ruthless but necessary plan deciding which instruments to turn off in what order to squeeze as much scientific value as possible from the fading power source. Of the 10 scientific instruments the spacecraft carried when it left Earth, 7 have been turned off. And each shutdown is a door closing forever, a set of questions that will never be asked because there is no way to turn back on an instrument once it has been shut off, if later you realize you were wrong. Remember, this is a machine built in the 1970s. Its memory is smaller than the chip in your car key. It is still storing scientific data on 8-track magnetic tapes from that era, and its brain can only process about 81,000 instructions per second, so slow that the phone in your pocket is tens of thousands of times faster. And its voice is also fading. In the old days, when it was closer, it transmitted data very quickly, but now that speed is only about 160 bits per second, slow to the point it is almost unbelievable. The transmitter on board is only about 22 watts strong, equivalent to a small light bulb, and by the time that signal crosses the vast distance to reach Earth, its power has dwindled to a tiny fraction, faint enough that it takes an entire network of giant antennas spread across the planet in Madrid, in Canberra, and Goldstone to be sensitive enough to hear that final whisper. And this is the most painful part of the entire story. Among the few senses still alive on the spacecraft are the two we need the most to read this mystery: the magnetometer that caught the jump and the ear that listens to plasma. They are still whispering, but each year the picture grows a little thinner. Each year the operations team has to make harder choices about what to keep running and what to let go, and somewhere in the early years of the coming decade, the final electricity will drop below the minimum threshold and the spacecraft will fall silent forever. Think about that irony. We have finally wandered into a region of the universe strange enough that it could rewrite textbooks, and the only tool standing inside it to bear witness is fading like a candle burning to its end, and there is no one on the way to replace it. No successor probe has been funded, no mission is waiting. Even if a new spacecraft capable of reaching that boundary were built and launched today, it would still take at least 25 more years to reach where Voyager is standing. That means when this machine finally falls silent, the only real-time window our civilization has opened to look into the space between the stars will close and remain closed for many decades afterward. But before that silence arrives, there is a moment on the calendar that has been locked in, a moment that will come whether anyone is paying attention or not. To imagine how far the spacecraft has drifted, think back to the night it nearly died, when every command took more than 22 hours to reach it. Since then, it has kept hurtling onward at more than 61,000 kilometers per hour each second, widening the distance, until now, at nearly 25 billion kilometers, it is about to reach a threshold that no human-made object has ever attained. Around the end of this year, its signal will take a full light day to reach us, not 22 hours anymore, but a full 24 hours, one complete day. If you send a greeting this morning, it will only just reach the spacecraft tomorrow morning, and the reply will not come back until the morning after next. 2 full days for a single exchange. No human object has ever been this far, not once in the entire history of our civilization. And the spacecraft will cross that threshold while still alive, still transmitting, still bearing witness to the strange region it is drifting through. But this is the thought that makes one fall silent. If that bold idea is correct, if the jump that will not come down is truly the trace of a cloud carrying the magnetic field of another star, then think about what it implies. Somewhere very far away and very long ago, perhaps even before our sun ignited, another star lived, spewed its own matter into the darkness, then faded and vanished from its sky. That magnetic breath has wandered through the space between the stars for millions, perhaps billions of years, touching nothing, witnessed by no one. And now a tiny machine, running on a scant bit of electricity, built by a species that has only just learned how to leave its planet, has drifted straight into that very breath. If this is true, then for the first time in history, an object made by human hands is touching the remnant of a star that is not ours, swimming quietly in the magnetic memory of a strange sun that died long before there was life on Earth. That is no longer simply physics. That is an encounter. A belated handshake across billions of years between two stars that never knew of each other's existence, mediated by a fragile scrap of metal we sent with the hope it would live 5 years. And there is another layer of meaning underneath. The star that gave birth to that cloud has perhaps long since gone out, with only this magnetic breath remaining still holding its shape, still telling a story about a star that no longer exists. And our machine itself, also on its way to its own death, is reading that story with a sense that is about to go dark. 2 deaths separated by billions of years and countless trillions of kilometers, gently touching in a single measurement. In all that humans have ever done, few things have been as curious, as bold, as gently resilient as this, an old machine still reaching out to touch the strangest thing at its final breath. And the gentle cruelty of all this is that we may never know for sure. That encounter may be happening right now, silently unconfirmed on a machine that may shut down before it can tell us what it has touched. Now let us face straight on the question at the center of it all, the question that the scientific community still cannot answer, and perhaps will not be able to answer for many years to come. What exactly is this jump that will not come down? What makes this story a real mystery rather than a sensational headline is that here there is not one but 3 competing explanations, and the brightest minds studying this very data set do not agree with each other. The first explanation is the boldest one, the one that gave our story its title. It is the idea that the spacecraft has entered a small cloud of ancient interstellar plasma carrying a stronger magnetic field than any star or star-forming region that spewed it out long ago. The second explanation is far less dramatic, and ironically, it is the one the spacecraft's own research team leans toward in their official publications. Remember the boundary that does not stand still that we talked about, the shifting surface distorted by giant waves stretching as far as 10 astronomical units. If that boundary can ripple so violently, then perhaps the magnetic field bump is not the trace of another star at all, but only a giant compression wave originating from our own sun during a period of its activity. It is still the same old piston, only a push, never seen before a single giant ripple so large it takes years to pass through. If this is correct, then there is no alien star at all, only our own star reaching its arm much farther than we thought. And the third explanation lies somewhere between the other two, and in a sense is the deepest. This is exactly the provocative possibility we whispered about earlier, now spoken out loud in a serious way. In this view, the strange calm the spacecraft measured after the bump stabilized shows that it has finally left the region still stirred by the sun and has truly stepped into a pristine interstellar region, a new state of balance that no human instrument has ever touched. If correct, then the jump that will not come down is not a sign that the spacecraft has entered something, but a sign that it has finally left something that we have only just for the first time touched the true universe lying beyond the reach of our star. 3 stories. 1 data set. And there is a detail in all this that makes it one of the rare, honest moments in science. The very scientist who floated the boldest idea about the cloud from another star also admits it is only one of many possibilities, and he said it freely when answering a reporter, but was extremely cautious when putting pen to paper in his peer-reviewed articles. The same person daring to dream big in front of the camera, but restrained on the page, and both versions are equally honest, because that is the true shape of knowledge at the edge of what humans can reach. The person who led this mission for many decades once said that, looking back, he realized how little we knew about even our own solar system before Voyager, that the spacecraft kept discovering things we did not even suspect were there to discover time after time. The jump that will not come down is only the latest in that long chain of the unexpected, and the only way to distinguish between the 3 stories is to need more data, either from the spacecraft itself that is fading year by year, or from a new witness that no one is on the way to send. So it is very possible that when this soul-judging machine finally falls silent, all 3 stories will still be there hanging suspended forever side by side, none vindicated and none ruled out, a question frozen right at the moment it is most interesting. This is what I want you to carry away from all this. There is a truth in the middle of the story easy to miss when you are still focused on the numbers and the hypotheses. Right now, the only scientific instrument humanity has ever placed into the space between the stars is nearly 50 years old. It was built with technology that predates home computers. It runs on an amount of electricity so small it is hard to believe less than a small light bulb. And it is quietly bringing home a question that we may never have enough time to answer. We have built things much larger than it, much more powerful, much more expensive. And none of them is in the right place at the right time to witness a needle jump up and never come back down. There are questions about the universe that can only be answered from inside the universe. Not from telescopes on the ground, not from satellites orbiting Earth, but only from a machine bold enough to keep going long enough to truly reach there. We have exactly one machine like that. It is aging, it is running out, and it is drifting every hour farther into the darkness. And even after its final voice falls silent and we lose contact forever, it will keep drifting silent and alone for tens of thousands of years more, gliding past strange stars it will never report back on, and very possibly outlasting even the Earth that gave birth to it. At some point, we will have to say goodbye to that old friend, not because it left us, but because we can no longer hear it. But perhaps, just perhaps right now, it is swimming in the last remaining breath of a star that died before there was life on this planet, and we will never know for sure. The signal is still coming stretched across a distance, nearly a light day long, bringing news from a universe stranger, more connected, and lonelier than any model built from Earth ever dared to describe. A machine fading away, a question that may never be closed, and a fragile chance to listen before the silence descends. Because the real question, after all, is perhaps not where that cloud came from, but whether any of us is still truly listening when the final whisper rises. If this kind of story is what you come for, subscribe right now and turn on notifications, because next time we will go even farther into the edge of what science truly knows. Leave a comment about what surprised you the most, and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that out there in the darkness, a tiny witness running out of time is still whispering home.